Oh my God.
Look, folks, this is well, anyway, I thought it was most successful. Find me. We'll start this.
It's worse than I thought. Okay, I'll admit it. I didn't think it was going to be this bad. I thought he was going to do above. I thought he was going to do like just average. He's worse.
It's your. Here comes President Biden after the NATO summit in Washington. Let's listen.
Thank you. Please be seated. Well, good evening. We just concluded this year's NATO summit, and the consensus among the members was it was a great success. It was especially momentous because it represented the 75th year, the most important military defense alliance in the world's history of the world. We should never forget that NATO grew out of the wreckage of World War II, the most destructive war in history. The idea was to create an alliance of free and democratic nations that would commit themselves to a compact of collective defense. Standing together, they knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows if they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. But this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. I directed the intelligence community to be a significant amount of intelligence be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion.
It's not a gaffe, but it's starting.
Some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point.
Just read the prompter, dog. I don't know why he's trying to flex.
And to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO's not only stronger, NATO is bigger because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance. And it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful. Some of you forgot that, but that's exactly what he said. But I made it clear, a strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I would remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than the political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know the answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe.
No, they don't. They don't care. No one cares.
Stronger because of our alliances.
Ask Americans, do they keep NATO or get free health care? You'll get a 100% win rating for health care.
Still holes today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We're an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to 3 other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month.
Oh, come on. This is also, again, right-wing.
Working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months,
we kept them illegals out, Jack.
Has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive. And I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America.
Okay, now we're getting to the press. Now we're getting to the presser.
We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment
Is this
matters.
unscripted? What are you, crazy? No, he's reading a teleprompter.
With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
I told you.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race is still open.
Of course it's rigged. I told you all of this ahead of time.
George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she's not qualified to be president. Let's start there. Number one. The fact is that
are you kidding me? It's
is
the
that
first
I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving, And because, look, I got more work to do. We got more work to finish. There's so much, we made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go.
He skipped
Working class
again.
people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down. And so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about your, you mixed up
so bad.
Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing in my leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following.
Oh, my God.
Look, folks, this is, well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time.
Stop!
And find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one. Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge. I didn't think it was going to be this bad. I thought he was going to do above. I thought he was going to do like just average. Decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, just got started, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. And under my plans so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way,
bro, he's resorting back to talking points. Like, he doesn't know how to answer questions, so he's just like riffing. He just, they gave him talking points that he's like memorized that he's just saying.
Mainstream economists have said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. Doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit.
The question is asked too, though.
For example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase of corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union? Not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better.
This is the worst part about his rhetoric, because like he is actually pro-labor union compared to everyone else. And I hate that he is the worst vessel to carry on this message.
40% of the industries in the United States. And
he's literally tarnishing.
The best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there, and import what the product was. And so what did I do?
I hate
that he is the
guy.
To Europe, to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was,
bro, is he going to filibuster and then only end up answering 3 questions?
So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming into being. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies. All through, and by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. And like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well. But the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. The presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look,
fake news.
What I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore.
That's not good.
I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway. That's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time.
Oh, he's shitting on the leakers,
I'm
the
catching hell
staffers.
from my wife for that. Anyway.
Oh, he
I'm
forgot.
sorry, Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten a more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is where I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people.
Jill Biden, commander-in-chief, he admitted it.
They shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
Bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
He's going to say, watch me.
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. What do I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
That was the question.
Elections in the U.S. have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron.
Notice how every question is glaze-edge.
To have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern.
Every question starts with a glaze-edge.
Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern. It
starts out with a glaze-edge, and then they ask a question.
Donald Trump
pre-prepared.
Weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems
came for the copium, thought for a single second he might drop out. Why would I be sad about that?
That worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin.
Yeah, because Putin hadn't invaded Ukraine yet. And also failed.
And he was talking about what we should do.
What?
We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine. I said, you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. No, that's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? In my office. I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so
wait, what?
Joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they were already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe, I can't recall what he said a public in our...
No, they took the mic away from the reporter.
He said, we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. We were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia.
No, they took away the mic of someone else's, like someone in the audience. Someone asked them an additional question. I'm mad that we can't hear it.
Between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it. We're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where's it?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating. They're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi,
for real, on God, yo, he's locking the Zoomer vote.
China,
no cap,
is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we cannot. You have to make clear China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that Xi understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so we, for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well, want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules. And you don't have the authority. And you have
that was some huge vindication for you on the balloon
the
thing. You said it was the case and he just proved it. Yeah.
There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules.
He's being a big boy.
For example,
on parts that it doesn't matter, and he already up in the beginning, so everyone is going to hyper-focus on Vice President Trump.
Products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have
Great job,
both
Joe.
China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Yeah, he did that too, by the way.
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in, as a consequence of that, their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it, but we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, We talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to, it came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry,
Stop hedging against Biden doing well. He's old as. I mean, he's not. It's not like the most disastrous conference.
Weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of
broadly
the West, particularly in Europe and Japan.
It's not good, but
to be able
nobody
to
was
generate
expecting it to be good.
Ability to produce their own weapon systems, not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same.
New York Times already running.
That's what Russia's trying to figure out. That they went to China, and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need.
Do the reporters realize nobody cares about NATO news? Well, this is in the heels of a NATO 75-year anniversary. This is his favorite
to go
subject.
deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that
really
he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in
He's
his
talking
behavior.
about Xi, chat, shut up.
But
he's talking about chairman,
leader I'm not prepared to
general
deal with.
secretary, the GOAT.
But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way,
I think there's really good reason to talk to Putin, for the record.
I think Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life. But they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there.
He said China doesn't supply weapons. He said China doesn't supply weapons directly, which is true.
Controlling
they do help, though.
Running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate.
They give
with
technology.
People. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anybody else has. We just put together with, today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target. And
I hate everything he's saying right now. But right now, everyone is only hyper-focusing on, like,
from NPR,
the way he's saying it. So that's, like, the major point of contention right now. But I will address all of the ridiculous nonsense that he's chirping about in terms of foreign policy.
You spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war. And I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the
president of
King
Mexico,
of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli war cabinet,
you think?
I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. Some of the reporters around here come me all the time and heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel.
He was alive when Israel wasn't.
This war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel and the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port we attached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful.
That was a massive failure.
That's why when I
harder
went
than the
to
top of the
Israel
hour ad break is. Get those Twitch primes ready, folks. 3-minute ad break coming now. I wanted to wait until this was over.
After bin Laden, there's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation.
You need to subscribe. We don't want to see the ads.
Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing them 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage.
There's only one shipment.
Remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than
He's literally
most,
like, kill as many
there is
Palestinians as possible, but the day after, you can't occupy it permanently.
on the
That's
West
cool.
Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I just have to keep moving to make sure that we get as much done as we can toward a ceasefire, and get those.
Hamas is literally more popular than it ever has been as a direct consequence of Israel's incursion.
Than they are here. But then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway.
Bridge candidacy in 2020. You referred to yourself as being a bridge candidate for a younger, fresher generation of Democratic leaders, and I wanted to know what changed.
What changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think, I won't put words in anybody's mouth. Most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed. And what I realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom to know how to deal with the Congress, to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen. And I want to finish it, to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and I hadn't inherited what I did and we just moved things along, anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh Weingrove, I'm sorry, was the next one. I'll do 2 more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of your colleagues, Democrats on the Hill, are watching tonight as they assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about how the next week or 2 goes would inform your...
Am I using that way, you said?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out, for the longest time it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to North Carolina to, to demonstrate that I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade
people. He's like All Might. He's losing power.
Or people are already there.
His cycle is done.
The other thing is, we have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time. We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters. I forget exactly how many. I want to cite a number and then find out I'm off. But we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized. We're moving. And that's awful hard to replace in the near term. And here's the other thing. I was in the Senate a long time. Very proud of what I've done in the Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman or ranking member and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. Anyway, I'm going to be going around making the case of the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea, we're sitting around, this where Kamala is so good as well. we're sitting around. More children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death.
What?
The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promise the NRA, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything.
He woke
got
up.
A Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous. There's so much we can do still. And I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too. But I remember I made a speech on democracy in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. And I'm not being critical, just observing. The bulk of the press said, what the hell is he talking about that for? Democracy. You did. Democracy is not an issue. Democracy is not an issue. Except the polling data showed 60% of the people knew I was right, thought I was right. I'm not asking you a question. You don't have to answer, obviously. But do you think our democracy is under siege based on this court? Do you think democracy is under siege based on Project 2025? Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education, make sure, I mean, we've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say hand off to another generation.
No, that's why you have to hand off, dumbass. That's the whole point.
I've got to finish this job.
That's literally the reason. By the way,
you've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election? Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, two things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February. And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff, I said, I'm going to go to South Korea. We're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea back together again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move and see that we can expand it. You know, the only thing age does is help you with it. Creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay attention. And so the point I'm making is, I think it's important that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out. Hadn't a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his.
He's slowed down so much since the beginning.
I laid it all out. And every single day, I'm surrounded by good docs.
One glaringly obvious difference is when he's answering questions versus when he was reading the teleprompter. I know that the media will point that difference out.
No one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam, I'll do it. But that's where I am. Haley Bull, Scripps.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it comes to support for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia? And if I may, your convention is coming up where your delegates are pledged to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I got overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Oh, I hate that.
They vote for someone else?
Sure. Look, I'll end this with this. I served in the Senate a long time. I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think the top if they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least a purple, it was a red state when I started, in terms of where you now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate.
It's the narrative that they always cast me aside.
You know, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them.
It's just too narcissistic.
And they're going to run away. I get it. But so far,
I got the Don Jr. tweet and I got the Ben Shapiro tweet too.
In their states. Look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge, and you're all experts. I'm not being solicitous about the president. You're experts on this stuff. How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. When the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. So bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started. I mean, it hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to
I don't want to skip it, but I have to pee.
And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, you know, we talk about, you know, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
Mr. President,
okay. Thanks.
This ends tonight's press conference. Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
One more extraordinary moment in this presidential campaign, and then we say this often, and we can't overstate it, that every day in the spotlight is another critical test for President Biden in this election.
Did I miss something crazy? Did I just miss something insane as I was pissing?
Debate. Obviously, a lot of criticism for the former President Donald Trump in that debate as well, but it's the president who must now make the case before the American people and in front of fellow Democrats that
here's Secretary Blinken, Austin, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan when he said Vice President Trump.
I think she's not qualified to be president.
10 reporters there, about 55 minutes or so, also gave comments right.
Okay, hold on. All right, I'm going to give you my thoughts in a second. Hold on. You missed it, but the most insane part, he said he would drop out if people were saying he couldn't win, but nobody's saying that. Okay, I'll run it back in a second. Hold on. Calm down.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start.
Look at his face. Bro, oh my God. Like Blinken already, listen, Blinken and Lloyd Austin are used to it. They've had their share of those like what moments because, you know, they're involved in Israel-Palestine. So they know to stay stone-faced. Look at Jake Sullivan at the end, though.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president.
Like, he just blinks. Lloyd Austin, military man right there. That's CIA's very own. He's like...
That I think she was not qualified to be president. So...
Look at you. Dude, he's like, oh, no.
Let's start there. Number one. The fact is that the consideration is...
Biden had an all-time mic drop at the end? Yeah, we'll do it. Hold on, I'm going to do it.
I don't think you have them telling you that all the major... I think it's important. Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you... So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me they should...
for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia. And if I may, your convention is coming up where...
I recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, you know, we talk about, you know, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
Mr. President,
okay. Thanks.
This ends tonight's press conference.
Do you guys think that, like, he's held captive in a vat and they're just, like, not showing him? Do you guys think that, like, they're not showing him polls, maybe? It's so Trumpian. I'm going to keep going. Don't worry. I'm going to keep going. Hold on. Do you feel like this is, like, very Trump? You know how, like, they would draw crayon shit on his, they would give him, like, little crayons in the morning for his press briefing so we would pay attention? That type of shit. Where they're basically just, like, not showing him polls. But he did say polls are bad and wrong early on. So I suspect that, like, he's just aware. He's just coping.
Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
I mean, they are listening to him. That's bad. Okay, is that Andy Cohen? No, it does look like Andy Cohen. Okay, so a couple thoughts right off the jump. You know, I said he was going to do average, like good enough. And there were definitely some big flubs, but ultimately I think he did good enough. Okay? So what do I mean by this? There's long periods. He filibustered a lot. This is not a super contentious. Just listen to my words before you hit me with the copium. Okay? Ben Shapiro had this tweet where he said he started off rough and he's still having rough patches, but this is good enough to keep him in the race, which is terrible news for Democrats and excellent news for Trump. Now, I don't think that is enough for the Democrats to not come out with their statements. Okay? But it will cause enough of the holdouts to refrain from saying something. Okay? I still think that a lot of the Democrats are going to start popping off. Representative Jim Himes of D. Connecticut, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, asked Joe Biden to step aside. This is from 1 minute ago, okay? Look at his reply. Maybe I spoke too soon. He's yelling and jabbering. The wisdom of doing this press conference at NATO is clear. Shaky on other stuff. The POTUS is very comfortable on national security issues. The last second whisper. The last second whisper is bad. Obviously, he had really impactful moments within this presser that everyone is going to pay attention to. So he's anyway, okay? He was before he did this presser, and he's still after this presser. But we're because he did not collapse entirely like he did at the debate. Why do I say this? It's because while the additional people from the Democratic Party that were slated to release their pressers or slated to release their PR statements about how Biden should step aside are still going to come up. Okay? They're still going to come out and say it because this is not instilling confidence in anybody. And to be fair, there was no way that he could patch something so glaringly obvious that so many people are now saying, which is that he's too old to perform, too old to function, right? But he got just enough rope. He got just enough, especially on the NATO shit, which is his bread and butter, that this will give him the copium and all of his sycophants enough ammunition to say, oh, where are you now? Okay? Because he was, for long enough sequences throughout the filibuster, especially as it pertains to NATO, pretty coherent. Okay? However, there are a couple things that you have to pay attention to. I said 2 things to pay attention to with Biden's big boy presser. He's slowed down significantly over the course of the past hour. Okay? He has a time limit to how long he can perform. Number 2, the difference in pace, tone, and coherence between reading the prompter in the beginning versus off-the-cuff answers is massive. You put that side by side, and people will still understand the exact same point. Now, also, obviously, the Vice President Trump moment is going to be the most significant flub here that everyone is going to hyper-focus on. He said, okay, wait, Biden was asked, David Dayen had a good take on this. He said, Biden was asked what changed on him being a bridge to the next generation. He says what changed was what he inherited. He spent his entire news conference saying that the economy's great, border crossings down, crime down, inflation down. Why isn't it a good time? Obviously, it's because he's selfish. Earlier today, he called Zelensky Putin. And then he very quickly followed that up with, on the first answer to the question, he called his own vice president Trump. That's not only just embarrassing, but that is exactly what people are going to focus on. Do you understand? It's the worst of both situations. If he had actually, well, I guess the other situation would be that he just had a banger session and then liberals would be on copium mode and liberals would be like riding with Biden super hard. The holdouts, the dead enders, rather, would be extra aggro. However, what ended up happening is he gave them just enough ammunition to say, see, it was a one-off. So they'll get even crazier in the upcoming days as more and more Democrats come out and demand he step aside. Okay? After hearing this, what would you say the odds are that he's the Democratic candidate come November? I don't know, because I don't know how stupid the Democratic Party is. I don't know how cowardly the Democrats can be. News. Moments after President Biden concluded his news conference, House Intel top Democrat Jim Himes calls on Biden to step aside. He calls Biden a remarkable leader of unparalleled public service, but he no longer believes that Biden is the strongest candidate to beat Trump. I am too scarred from my experiences with the Democratic Party in 2016 to believe that they won't stay the course. Okay? It brings me no pleasure to report this to you, but I have seen the depravity and the feckless cowardice from the Democratic Party before. And guess what? That was Hillary Clinton. She was actually technically, polls were cucked or whatever, but she was still beating Donald Trump in the polls, at least. So I do not know how far I don't know how unimaginably cucked the Democrats can get. Okay. I don't know. So I can't give you a adequate prediction that you want. But yes, of course, MSDNC is saying he knew the facts. He's with it. He's coherent because they're doing cope
qualified
mode.
to beat him. There are other Democrats who could beat him too. And as you said, the reason I would get out is if the data told me, the data showed that I was not going to be able to beat him. Well, no data will ever show that definitively, but him acknowledging that it's not only him who could beat Trump is an important sort of message from the reality-based world.
Yes, there has been a picture of him in this kind of bunker with his staff and a kind of mutually assured destruction, right? We're like, it's me or we're all going down together. Burn the boats is the sort of cliche I was thinking about, which is like there's no retreat, right? That was not his position tonight. He clearly intends on staying in the race, believes he is the best person to be president and to beat Trump, but did not offer the kinds of categorical dismissals of Kamala Harris or other efforts against him that I thought were possible and seemed to be present in the reporting as well. I should note that Jim Himes, who's the ranking member on intelligence, has come out with a statement saying he still believes the president needs to step down as the nominee for the Democratic Party. And I think one of the things we'll see in the fallout of this is it's almost impossible, I think, at this point, short of
a pretty amicable way to tie this together is actually this, which saves face for the Democratic Party and doesn't call into question like the 25th Amendment, which is skeptical congressional Dems saying Biden proved to them in this press conference that he can be president, but not necessarily that he can win. Two separate things, one told me. Does that make sense? So this way, the entirety of the Democratic Party is not being called into question as you know, accomplices that knew how Biden's mental faculties had deteriorated to a degree where he can't win the presidency and he can't even be the president. But ultimately, he performed, especially as it pertains to foreign policy, in the expected way. And I think you guys don't see that because you're obviously focusing on the things that everyone else is seeing. The average person is not going to look at this situation and have their takeaway be, oh man, Biden is so good. No one is saying that. But those in positions of power, those in the media, for example, are going to talk about the flubs, but they will also give him good marks on his NATO talking points. Because he did do that. He performed as well as expected when it comes down to American foreign policy. Obviously, every single American and every single person globally is going to be like, President Putin? What? Vice President Trump? What? And the resignations will come, will keep on coming. Here, let's hear what Jim Himes has to...
who is at the press conference with President Biden and was in the room. Mike, your impression having been there?
Yeah. Well, Chris, as somebody who has covered President Biden for 16 years, there's so much to unpack from this news conference. I thought so interesting to hear what he said about the prospects for a convention in which delegates could vote their conscience. He talked about being open potentially to a neurological exam, and if the doctors recommend that. He talked about being willing to pass the baton to Vice President Kamala Harris if his advisors can convince him that he can't win and that she can. But I think for so many people watching this news conference, we can boil this down to two moments. The first was President Biden giving an extensive answer, a detailed answer, an answer full of decades of experience on the world stage to the question about the future.
Normally, I agree with you, but I think you're underestimating how well this presser will be received. What do you mean? I'm saying that the presser is going to get good marks, especially on foreign policy.
If you want to know why President Biden wants to see this through, wants to finish the job, it's because he thinks no one else can match that experience that he has in dealing with the most important foreign policy question of our time. It was a long answer. It was an extensive answer. It really was an illustrative of how he's...
Oops. We lost the MSDNC. Anyway, the other side of this conversation for the average person is that the takeaway from this is that he's a malignant narcissist that is sowing chaos and disorder in the Democratic Party, which was, ironically, the strongest positions the Democrats had against Trump and the Republicans, especially among moderate voters
press conference had happened
and independents.
On June 27th.
He will not be able to make up that gap by being an expert on NATO. okay, by seemingly coming across like he knows what he's talking about when it comes to foreign policy. You don't this is not something that people care about as much, okay? I keep saying this. This is the worst community to say this in because obviously you guys are dialed into all of American foreign policy to a degree that is a detriment when you're analyzing the election. So you think inside of your own bubble that everyone cares as much as I do, whether it be the NAFO Andes, the Ukrainian flag in the bio Andes, or vice versa, right? But ultimately, I do not believe that the average American cares about foreign policy all that much, okay? This is reflected in the polls even when it comes to Gaza. Now, obviously, key demographics care about Gaza in key states, and that's a totally separate issue. But as far as we're talking about like strengthening NATO allegiances and whatnot, that is not going to put you across the finish line, okay? It's not. Americans care about the money in their pockets, care about how everything is expensive, which he made some decent statements about as well. But ultimately, they care about the flubs because they think Biden is too old and too incompetent, which he gave enough ammo for the media cycle to continue on that front. So ultimately, it wasn't such a spectacular defeat for him that like even Biden has to resign in disgrace from the presidential race. Here is, by the way, here's the greatest indication. Don Jr. over on Rumble is praising Biden's performance, saying he's doing okay, and he could stay in if he wanted to. He's not too bad. This lines up with the narrative that the Trump campaign wants Biden to stay in because it has a strategy to beat him, but not Kamala Harris. CNN headline, Obama Pelosi huddled as Democrats try to steer Biden out of the race. I haven't listened to you in over a year. Joe stuff got me stopping by. I can confirm I don't give a shit about NATO. I just want my rent to quit being so stupid high. And for the guy who's not insane to not be a geriatric mumbling buffoon. Exactly. Right now, there's a lot of holdouts in terms of voting for the Democrat or maybe even the Republican, but I think mostly for the Democrat. Okay? Now, that's my own personal assessment of the situation. I don't think there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh, yeah, I really want to vote for Trump, but like, I don't know. As much as there are people who are like, I just don't want to vote at all for either of these guys. They're both old. One's a convict. The other one's a cadaver. Who gives a shit? My life is not going to change. So how do you get those guys motivated? How do you get those guys to come back into the fold? Well, having an 800-year-old demon is not going to be that guy. Okay? It's not going to be the method. It's not going to be the way to do that. Even if Biden magically, like I said, even before this president started, even if he magically became this phenomenal orator out of nowhere, if the talking points simply stand on NATO, right? Even if he did a phenomenal job with the speech and he just like nailed it on all of the NATO talking points and whatever, ain't no American gives a f about that, dude. Are you kidding me? No American gives a f. We're selfish from the jump anyway, even if you think NATO is a good thing, okay, which I objectively do not, but that's besides the point. No American is like, oh man, yeah, this is my NATO. I'm the NATO voter, okay? I mean, it's not that I don't care about foreign countries. Those situations are horrific. It's not like America's perfectly fine, though. No, it's just they don't give a shit. Like, that's not a thing. And it's supposed to be that way. Because if you constantly had to carry the weight of all of the death and destruction that America literally contributes to globally in an effort to deliver you $5 jalapeno poppers, you would go insane. It would literally be like constantly having to hear every sound that your ear is able to hear that you automatically tune out in order to not go crazy. Okay? That's literally what this is. So the system is designed to ensure that those in the imperial core, those who are literally living in America in the bosom of empire, don't think about the negative consequences. So you can't turn around and be like, that's why we need NATO. That's why we need NATO. The Finlandization of Ukraine versus the Ukrainization of Finland or whatever, the NATOization of Finland. Like those are not bars that are going to be that are going to be popular outside of the DMV. Okay. They might do well for dudes working a Raytheon. They might do well for the Redditors. They might do well for, Globe emoji Twitter accounts. But ultimately, that is not necessarily a thing that people give a shit about outside of that insulated community of single issue voters. Do you understand? And that's why I presented the dynamic. I presented the question. If you asked Americans. Hassan Biden moment. Wait, what did I say? What are you guys? Is it because you don't know what DMV is, dumbasses? DMV? No, it's DC, Maryland, Virginia. I'm using the proper terminology. You guys are just unaware. Okay. Anyway, yeah, Beltway lingo is right. Anyway, whatever. Listen. Dudes in the Rust Belt don't about NATO. If you were to ask every single American right now, do you care about beefing up NATO alliances or do you care about healthcare? Like, you have to pick one, for example. Not that this is a real equation, obviously. Well, kind of is, but it's not a direct one-to-one. Like almost 100%, probably like 99%, with the exception of the most Redditor-brained neoliberal out there, 99% of Americans would be like, no, I want healthcare. What are you talking about? That's why it doesn't really matter that NATO is Biden's bread and butter, but I'm not convinced the American public cares about foreign policy all that much. What is this? Proof of collaboration between Putin and Trump? Okay, dude. You guys are pogging over like the lamest memes. Ultimately, his best points are on an issue that is otherwise not helpful for his reelection chances, and everything else, as far as his like performance goes, was not good enough. And I don't even think that there is a performance that is good enough for Biden to dig himself out of the polling hell that he has found himself in. Okay? I just don't believe that there is a performance out there that is a silver bullet that will somehow magically turn the page and get people to reconsider Biden with fresh eyes. Do you understand? Also, CNN reports Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi have spoken privately about Biden and the future of his campaign, and they both expressed concerns about how much harder they think it's become for the president to beat Donald Trump. There was also this side of it, but I think people are overemphasizing this. Biden to his delegates, they're free to do whatever they want. Asked if that meant they're free to vote for different candidates, Biden said yes. I don't think so. I think that's just like that's just wish casting, okay? Like, no, I don't think he's an old man, okay? You are 100% correct. This presser was just the choice between Biden having the dropout now or if Biden will drag his feet to the convention. And to those saying Obama called him to step aside on 2016, now he has to do it again, you fail to recognize that Obama calling him to step aside in 2016 is a resentment that carried over with Joe Biden. Okay? So Obama calling him to step aside now might not even do the job. I think this presser will be received internally at the DNC a lot worse than will be spun in the media. Pre-select the questions, the vast majority of which is foreign policy, and he's up. I think we're about to see some crazy statements over the next couple of days. Breaking, CNN. Based on discussions with more than a dozen members of Congress, operatives, and multiple people in touch with both Obama and Pelosi, that many say the end for Biden's candidacy feels clear, and at this point, it's just a matter of how it plays out. Why do you not see that the well-being of Americans is connected to how peace and/or war is in the world? You're telling me? I just described to you how the extraction of natural resources and commodities and labor from the third world is the only reason why Americans get to enjoy $5 jalapeno poppers. This must be bait, right? You're going to try to hit me with the top of the hour ad break now. At the top of the hour, there is one commodity whose value has increased. The avoidance fee for the 3-minute ad break at the top of the hour. Lol, is Hasanabi educated? Like, does he hold any degrees? Just wondering. Nah, I'm just making this stuff up as I go along. He's a lot smarter than half of the people. That's nice thing to say. I still think I'm a dumbass, but anyway. I was at the bagel shop and I pronounced jalapeno like how you do on instinct, and it was so embarrassing. Yeah, I do that too. I do that. It started as a meme. Now I say it unironically. Same with Brandon, calling Joe Biden Brandon. Meth Surfy, thank you for the 5 tier 1 gifted subs. Line 5 people to no longer see the ads at the top of the hour. Here's a 3-minute ad break now. Anyway, also Arkansas is another word that I called him Brandon to AOC at the Trump rally. Yeah, I know. It is what it is. Okay, I'm locked in. But yeah, during the presser, 4 Democratic sources told CBS News that they expect dozens of Democratic lawmakers over the next 48 hours to issue statements calling for President Biden to step out of the race. Mark Brennan reports House Democratic leadership has indicated to the members that they should speak their minds. Multiple sources told CBS News. One of those well-placed sources predicted that the next 3 or 4 days will be brutal and that it may become untenable by sometime next week. It's gonna get messy over the course of the next couple of days for sure. My friend is a famous black actress, won't expose them, and they were at dinner with Obama and Hakeem Jeffries, who both privately expressed that they want him to step down. Can't confirm. But yeah, who am I? Sorry for spam. Okay. That's a real my uncle is Nintendo tape.
Now, 4 of you, 1, 2, 3, 4, all of you think that Biden should be staying in the race. You told me you think that he should pass the torch. The 2 of you weren't decided. My question for you, you weren't decided before this happened if he should stay in the race. How do you feel now after watching this news conference?
Relieved, and I think he should stay in.
So your opinion has changed from not sure to he should stay in?
Yes.
Okay. And how about you? How do you feel? You weren't sure. How do you feel now?
Same. I think he's the logical choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you thought he should pass the torch. How do you feel right now?
I still believe he should pass the torch.
And why do you say that?
I think he conveyed more defensiveness versus confidence, and I think we are really craving to be able to be confident about the candidate that we carry into the November election.
How did you feel about this news conference?
Yeah, of course, all the old pieces of think he's great. They're old. They're old pieces of sorry. I got all the smoke on the fucking planet for grandma right now. Okay? I'm sorry. If you catch me around someone who's over the age of 65, I got all the smoke for them lately. Do you understand? You don't like hey, that's my grandma. Sorry. Your grandma shouldn't vote. Okay? If there was a button, I'd be pressing it right now. You don't understand me. Okay? Lately, I've gotten so much more resentful towards the boomers that I unironically am becoming anti-medication like I'm RFK Jr. Okay? Modern medicine has gone too far. Modern medicine has gone too dang far. We're keeping alive in a way where we shouldn't be, maybe. We should be reconsidering it. Okay? Call me the Japanese Yale academic the way I'm advocating for certain things. Call me Midsommar. Call me Swedish the way I'm saying Midsommar now. Okay?
They got their workout in. I did not. So they're ahead. The news continues. That's it for us. The Source with Caitlin Collins starts now. See you tomorrow.
It's crazy, brother. It's crazy. Yeah, we used to die in our 40s with honor for a reason. Okay? Is this so getting taken out of context? Okay, I'm obviously memeing.
President Biden just delivered his first solo news conference in 8 months, one that came at a critical moment as he's seeking to shore up his re-election bid and regain the confidence of his party, as more and more Democrats have publicly called for him to drop out of the 2024 race. That includes another one, Jim Himes, who is the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, minutes after Biden finished saying this.
But I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started.
The president repeatedly argued that he does believe he is the most qualified to run, though, of course, it's not his resume that's under scrutiny tonight. It's his age and his ability to beat Donald Trump and also to finish a second term if elected, at the end of which he would be 86. President Biden called on 10 reporters and answered 19 questions during those 59 minutes of that press conference. He was defiant at times, scoffed at the premise of some questions.
By the way, I told your asses that he was going to be competent enough that like every single one of these psychos are going to go crazy. Anyone questioning President Biden's cognitive abilities, he's so defiant. Brooklyn Dad is defiant, folks. I mean, he was crazy yesterday, and he's crazy now, and he will be crazy tomorrow. But goddamn, are they going to get annoying? The Biden dead enders are going to be so unimaginably annoying for the next 4 to 5 days, okay? Brooklyn Dad is quite literally paid by DNC PACs. Yeah, you have to understand something, though. No, not. At this moment, he's not. Because the DNC PACs would not be paying him to pump Biden this hard. Okay? Because the DNC doesn't want Biden. What do you mean? He's defiant against the DNC. This is a unique brain rot that is cultivated in the most diehard loyalists of the Democratic Party, where they're just like LARPing as though they are Brandon or Busters. Harry Sisson, Brooklyn Dad Defiant. I'm telling you right now, every single one of these guys, if tomorrow Brandon resigns, would say, look at how gracefully he resigned. What a beautiful statesman. What a beautiful legacy. Now it's time to get to work. Okay? They would. Tomorrow, they'd be like, they're diehards for the Democratic Party. Okay? They're not diehards for an 800-year-old fossil. Joe's going to send his Red Guard out in the countryside to hunt down the corrupt capitalist roaders in the Democratic Party. Bad news. Charlotte Ladder Climber herself. I obviously have to go incognito for this because she blocked me a long-ass time ago. Bad news for many pundits and reporters. This has been a great presser for President Biden. His answers have been deeply informed, nuanced, and assertive. He sounds like a commander-in-chief who can see the whole board and knows the right moves. Devastating for his critics. These people want to lose. It's hilarious that the most anti-Bernie people in 2020 are now acting like the very pieces of that they accuse Bernie people of acting like. Yes. You're very right. I work for this Lincoln Project offshoot, Resolute Square, and the Biden dick-eating I am hearing is diabolical, while also hearing we should prepare for a Kamala swing with our graphics and shit. Yeah, of course. These guys don't care. They are literally just whoever's on the top of the ticket. They're like NPCs. Okay? They have been trained to unconditionally say how high when they mishear someone say jump. They're so conditioned that they have no other cognition capabilities. They're just chirping. Okay? This is the Fedayeen, not of Joe Biden, but of the Democratic Party.
In those answers. In some of the answers you played, you saw some of the problems. I mean, the misspoken name, the stumbles. The other thing is, you know, at once he says, I need to allay people's concerns, and so I have to be out there more and I have to do more. And at the same time, he complained about the length of his schedule and said they're putting too many things on my schedule, and that's why I didn't do well in the debate. And that's really the issue. The issue isn't about his record or history, or it's about his ability to move forward. And when he was asked those questions, he really didn't have a great answer for what people should expect in the future based on what they're seeing now. So, you know, I don't think this changed much. I think that a lot of attitudes
of course it didn't change much.
Kind of hardened. I don't think he's going to change them. And one last thing, Caitlin, he said at the end that you know, he might change his mind if his team came to him and told him that he couldn't win. But they haven't done that, or that someone else had a better chance of winning. If that's the case, then they're not really leveling with him about where this race is. And they really should. It's not fair to him if they're not telling him the truth. He is in a very, very tough spot. I don't know anyone in politics who would tell you, who looks at the numbers that we see, would tell you that he has a very good chance to win this race and that perhaps others wouldn't have a better chance to win this race. He needs to know that. And there need to be some hard conversations.
Yeah, he was asked that question there about whether or not if he saw polling that showed that the vice president would fare better in a matchup against Donald Trump, what he would do, and he made that answer there. And earlier, that soundbite that it was supposed to be there at the end was, of course, where he was asked about some remarks he made to governors in a meeting that he had with them following the debate. He talked about curtailing his schedule. The reporting was that he would stop doing public events after 8 o'clock. He defended that, saying, no, just instead of starting an event at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, starting it a little bit earlier in the evening, talking about constraining a schedule that he described as going from 7 a.m. until midnight. Of course, a presidential schedule can be unwieldy, as you, David Axelrod, know. And Congressman Ro Khanna, you know, as you're looking at this, minutes after President Biden got done speaking, Jim Himes, your colleague, who is the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, came out with a statement saying that he does believe President Biden needs to step aside from the 2024 race, after he made very clear he doesn't plan on doing so. What do you make of that call?
I'm sure Jim had that plan, and Jim knows foreign policy. But let me just be blunt. President Biden's command
and grasp of foreign policy was better and more coherent than 90% of the conversations on the Capitol. And so in this case, he was in his comfort zone. In this case, he was talking about things that he really knew. And I agree with David Axelrod that they put him in a very good position to talk about foreign policy.
Bro, Khan about to say the most unhinged shit you've ever heard. You're going to be like, what?
Situation coming out of it where, yes, there was the moment at the beginning where he said Vice President Trump instead of Vice President Harris, but he did have lengthy.
Many are saying Ro Khanna is the most indecipherable politician in America.
Israel.
And by many, I mean me. I'm saying that.
Test that you could see what you wanted to see.
Caitlin, you stole my answer. I was going to say Rorschach test, but I'll use confirmation bias. I would just correct one thing the Congress said.
Ro Khanna be like proletarian rise up one day, and then the next day he's like, we need to do a value-added tax specifically for the working poor.
To David's point, yes, the president did give an inch tonight on if they came to him and said, you can't win. But I think what that really means is, sir, if the election were tomorrow, you would lose. Now, thankfully for Joe Biden, the election is not tomorrow. So the question is, can you recover from what happened? Whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Can you recover? And Joe Biden believes he can. I don't know that he's right or wrong, but he's the president and he's the nominee. I have all the faith in the world in Vice President Harris. If God forbid something happened and she became the president in the way the Constitution meant, I'd feel very, very comfortable. Thank God that has not been the case. But right now, it just seems there's a little bit of freneticism. And also to David's point about how tonight didn't change anything. You know what? If the president had done something really out of line tonight, it absolutely would have changed everything. People would be like, you see, it happened again, he has to leave tomorrow. So give some credit where credit is due.
Democrats' biggest problem is that they care about the tea leaves entirely too much. They care about the chatter entirely too much. They're perennial focus testers. So they literally are too cowardly to make a bold proclamation at a time when it is absolutely necessary. Okay? That's it. That is the major issue here. That, like, they can't get together behind a closed door and be like, dude, what are we doing here? Like, what's going on? Are we really going to try to inch across the finish line? Like, what the are we doing? Like, every little flub, no matter how small of a gaffe it is going to be, it's going to be a major issue, and it's going to only snowball.
To live under Donald Trump's reign again. I refuse to risk our democracy. And Joe Biden is the person right now who is able to defeat him. And so when people are saying, do something to prove that you have the command of the knowledge, and you stand up and you call on 10 reporters and you answer 19 questions for 59 minutes, then I ask you, if you go and say step down, then what is the test that he must prove over and over again?
Draw a clock.
Like you.
Draw a clock.
Was calling from this.
Draw a clock.
Disingenuous.
Draw a clock.
Wrong, because that.
Woman, man, camera, TV.
And Joe Biden.
Woman, man, camera, TV.
People who are living with the fear of a possible dictator to take over this country.
Oh, it's so disingenuous. Like, if you really believe that a possible dictator is about to take over, you wouldn't be writing this hard, you careerist dickhead. Every single one of these careerist are just like, no, I want to keep my job. I want to get a new job. I want to work closely with the Brandon campaign. That's it. Yeah, no, draw a clock, ask him what year Beau Biden died, you know? Things like that.
Days in my life. And I'm a little annoyed and I'm furious because I talk to black
oh God. And then they just like use the black people shield. Oh my God. Black people shield deployed. Oh, hello.
Time again. And black people are saying, let it go, folks. And
dude, this conversation makes me want to claw my eyeballs out. It's like, Joe Biden's not black. Okay. We got to stop acting like he is. What's going on here? Like, black people are the most important Democratic Party voting bloc. Yes, this is true. But across the board, like, using black people as a shield to be like, no, we have to get this 800-year-old demon who literally said in an interview with a black broadcaster last week, he has so many blacks. He has the most blacks in his administration, more than every other president combined.
Joe Biden's numbers were not good going into that debate. They were, not good.
Like the idea that this is like what the black people want. The black people want Joe Biden is so stupid. Majority of black people also don't think that Joe Biden should be the candidate. The majority, okay? They poll black people. The majority of black people think Joe Biden should not be the president. An overwhelming majority of black people think, time and time again, throughout polls, that Joe Biden is too old to be president, okay? That's number one. Number two, his replacement is black. His replacement is a black woman. So the idea that like, oh man, you got to listen to black voices, sweetie, doesn't work here. Joe Biden is not black. Kamala Harris is. So what are we talking about? They have one speed. Every goddamn Democratic flack has one speed, dude. Always and forever. This is the candidate that black people want. Yeah, black people want him really bad.
Donald Trump does present an existential threat to our democracy. So the real question is Joe Biden the strongest person at this point to beat him? The numbers suggest maybe not.
Yeah, and those are the numbers that he was talking about there. It is a question, as you were saying, David, of what he's seeing versus what everyone else is saying. And so, Kristen, when you look at that, that is the prospects here. When he's being asked about if the numbers are better for Vice President Harris, there have been polls that showed that she would fare better against Donald Trump. Now, I think a lot of his advisors are skeptical of that because she has been tested on the national stage before in the 2020 primary. But what are you seeing versus what he said there at the end?
Well, as a pollster, I am very uncomfortable with the level of importance that is being placed on our industry right now. Because frankly, what President Biden decides to do should not just be about, am I up or down in the latest poll my campaign did? It should be about, do I really think that I'm fit to serve? And the voters disagree with the president's assessment on that question. They disagree pretty vehemently. And one good press conference does not put that aside because those beliefs existed before the one bad night that the campaign tries to say, oh, let's not worry about that. The problem Biden faces is it's not just about style. It is also concerns about substance. We've talked a lot tonight about he had this command of the issues in this press conference at NATO. Joe Biden's job approval before the debate was lower than his overall job approval on the issue of foreign policy. So the problem that Biden faces is that right now, voters don't think he's up to the task. As long as he stays in the race, Democrats are kind of stuck with no low-risk option.
What about him saying, the campaign hasn't really gotten started yet? I think everyone would agree the whole campaign has shifted now that we've had that debate, but he was saying, until the fall, that's when the campaign really gets underway. Is that still how it works with early voting? And
I think that is an outdated view of how politics works. I mean, recall in 2012, Mitt Romney was defined very negatively in May, and you could argue at that point it was kind of done. That right now, these are two candidates who are not unknown. It's not like Joe Biden's introducing himself to America at the Democratic convention this year. So that's where I think that assessment's not quite right.
Yeah, I do want to go now to one of the latest Democrats who today called on President Biden to step aside, Congressman Brad Schneider from Illinois. And Congressman, just when you listen to tonight's press conference, those questions that Biden took for an hour, did it change your mind on your decision today?
No, I think the president did a fine job. He showed a command of the issues, both domestic and foreign, showed a stark contrast to what we're dealing with former President Trump. But the fact is, and as was said earlier, we can't have a situation where every day we're holding our breath, whether it's a press conference, a debate, or a rally. And I think we're at a historic moment where the president can pass the torch to the next generation, not only unite the Democratic Party, but unite the country. And rather than slogging to a finish at the end of the election in November, we can run to the finish, win with a strong mandate, and continue this incredible experiment we've been working on for 248 years.
So what do you say to allies of the White House who watched that press conference, hear what you said just there, and say their argument would be, okay, well, there's nothing he can do to appease the critics who want him to get out of this race, even if he demonstrates, one flub at the beginning of that press conference, but then also delivering complex answers to questions about foreign policy. What do you say to that?
Well, I think we've got to look at what people are saying. I was at 8 parades last week celebrating the 4th of July. I walked by probably 50,000 people. Not one said to me, we need to keep President Biden. My outreach to my office is running almost 30-1, saying we need to bring someone who can unite us and move us forward. Not President Biden. And I talked to many of my colleagues. So I love he's done a great job. I think he has.
He said 30-1.
On a remarkable career, finishing as one of the greatest presidents we've ever had in our nation's
That
history.
ratio is devastating.
Passes the torch, and he does it successfully. He will go down as a historic figure in the pantheon of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, or Franklin Roosevelt.
There was some new polling that came out today from the Washington Post and ABC. If you look at the breakdown and some of the numbers, there were more Hispanic voters, more white voters who were saying that they did believe President Biden should step aside in this race. But there was a majority, I believe it was close to 56% of black voters who were saying that they did believe he should stay in this race. What would you say to those voters or in South Carolina or in other areas who are saying, we do want him to stay in? We haven't called on him to step aside.
Yeah. What I would expect to say is if President Biden goes to the podium, talks about the future, talks about passing the torch, and successfully transfers the mantle and does it before the convention where we have a unified convention, I would go and share the love for the president and say he is a remarkable man who's done a remarkable job, and he's given us the greatest gift to move forward and win in November. And I think most people, whether it's South Carolina, Illinois, or anywhere in the country, would agree.
What was your reaction when you heard him talking about when he was asked by Asma Khalid of NPR about being a bridge to the next generation? That is what he promised when he ran in 2020. Mm-hmm. She was asking about that, and he was saying it was because what's at stake here? Citing his experience essentially as a basis for staying in when it came to the economy, when it came to foreign policy, but also the stakes of democracy and what's at stake in this race. What was your reaction to that answer? Was that sufficient for you?
I thought it was a great question. And, I was the first person in the Illinois delegation to endorse President Biden 4 years ago. I did so because I knew he would be a good president, and he has been a great president. That said, I think part of the role of being able to be that bridge, to pass the torch to a new generation, having created or helped create in the Democratic Party not just a deep, but a wide bench from Vice President Harris. We've got governors across the country who have demonstrated records of significant accomplishments in their states as executives. We've got people in the cabinet, people in the Senate, the House. We've got a bench, and he has, I believe, the opportunity to show the way and open the door to the next generation in a way no one else has since George Washington. And I hope he takes that chance and, again, unites not just the Democratic Party, but I think he'll unite the entire nation.
Congressman Brad Schneider.
There is some truth, with the exception of Israel, there is some truth to inflation halting. And obviously, greedflation being a big component here in terms of the cost of living being incredibly expensive. Biden's policy accomplishments, his legislative agenda, especially when you look at that performance and compare it to the normal performance of other administrations, that it is actually a relatively solid legacy. So when these guys come out and say, dude, you have this legacy, you have to step aside. You literally have to step aside. You're tarnishing your legacy. They're not wrong. But the problem is, it is that exact legacy and the 50 plus years of being in office and running for president unsuccessfully since the 80s, is perhaps the reason why he's like, what do you mean? I killed it. I'm killing it. Shut the I'm doing it again. Okay? Like that is the major issue here. A lot of people are looking at the situation and going, dude, you're going to lose to Trump, and then no one is going to care about your legacy. You're going to cook the down ballot races. And there's, a very legitimate cause for concern here. But he's just like, no, it's my time. Remember when you guys said it was her time? Well, it's my time. Like, that's what it is. So it's just pure malignant narcissism. He is the old man who does not want, he's the elderly grandparent who does not want to give away the keys to the car. But it is obvious that he cannot drive the car any longer. Problem is, the car has a nuke attached to it. Okay? So if he truly recognizes how bad Donald Trump would be for NATO or all the things that he supposedly cares about, then he has to do the right thing and step aside. That's why in this very unique moment, you have the likes of people like myself who obviously find the Democratic Party to be abhorrent and feckless institutionalist cowards who can never meet the actual the actual devastating legislative agenda of the Republican Party that just wants to fucking drive the entire planet into hell. Okay? You find those guys unironically agreeing with me. The people that care the most about unseating Donald Trump are not those who are the Biden dead enders right now. They are those who want Biden out so they can actually put a capable candidate. One who is not going to have his brain leak out of his ears every other week. Now, the issue is the Democrats are still very bad at doing politics. So because of that reason, I still fear that there's a long way to go, even if they were to unseat Brandon, even if they were to get him to, step aside quietly and with dignity to preserve what remains of his legacy. Okay? Because if they continue along with this narrative that, like, they are the NATO party, that is going to have dire consequences. That is going to have dire consequences for their re-election chances.